Hey, Ron here from Military Images with a new episode of Life on the Civil War Research Trail. Today, I want to talk about this unique image that recently came across my radar, and I became fascinated by it because of the content. It's a very simple photograph, a documentary image of a chair, a beautiful chair. Above it is inscribed Hancock Chair, House of Representatives, Harrisburg. Below it is a signature or a name, compliments of William S. Cooper. Now, when I first saw it, when I first read that inscription at the top, it occurred to me that it might be related to Major General Winfield Scott Hancock, because the image dates from about 1864. And I pretty quickly thought, well, the Battle of Gettysburg had ended less than a year earlier. He's a son of Pennsylvania, and Winfield Scott Hancock might have been honored by the Pennsylvania legislature in Harrisburg. And he sat in this chair, and it became known as the Hancock Chair. So that was the story that I spun up in my head when I first glimpsed it. I also looked into William S. Cooper and found that there's a inventor and brass manufacturer by that name, fairly prominent. So he might have had this photograph made to pass around to folks. So fact of the matter is, I was wrong. My theory was completely wrong. I was way off. In fact, it is known, or it was known as the Hancock Chair, because people during the Civil War period and the years leading up to it believed that this chair was the one that John Hancock sat in during the Declaration of Independence's creation in that famous summer of 1776. Well, the reality is that story isn't true. In fact, the Hancock Chair, or what was believed to be the Hancock Chair, was understood to have been destroyed by the British Army when it occupied Philadelphia in the fall of 1777 and the spring of 1778. So in fact, the chair that you're seeing right now is a replacement chair that dates to about 1779, when Philadelphia furniture maker John Falwell created it and presented it to the Pennsylvania legislature. So this chair has its own unique history that starts in 1779. A few years later, in 1787, this chair was occupied by George Washington during the Constitutional Convention at Independence Hall. During that convention, 81-year-old Benjamin Franklin, his attention became focused on the chair, specifically one part of it, the sun design. So let me show you the chair today so you can see it. Here's the chair as it exists today, and here's the sun design that's at the top of that chair. That sun design became the object of focus of Benjamin Franklin. Famously, he mused whether or not it was a rising sun or a setting sun. Finally, he decides that it's a rising sun. So the chair, and we'll take you back to the image here. The chair sat in the Pennsylvania House of Representatives, where it was used by the presiding officer and possibly others until 1872. I would say about 8 or 10 years after this photograph was made, at which point it was returned to Independence Hall. The confusion about that chair, the original John Hancock chair, and then the reproduction made in 1779, that confusion continued in America until about 1935, when a furniture scholar named William McPherson Horner Jr. uncovered the story that I'm telling you today. Today, the chair is in the custody of the National Park Service. The name has changed too. It's no longer known as the Hancock Chair. Today, it's called the Rising Sun Armchair. And that's a name that emerged in the late 20th century in our lifetimes. In fact, in 1987, about the time that the name was becoming known as the Rising Sun Armchair, Ronald Reagan made a reference to it in his 1987 State of the Union. It's at the end, it comes at the end of his address. And as you know from Reagan's style of speaking, he would often use metaphors and point to icons to talk about America. And so this chair becomes his focal point for the end of that 1987 State of the Union. It's brief, and I'm going to read it to you. He says, Reagan says, "We the people, starting the 3rd century of a dream and standing up to some cynic who's trying to tell us we're not going to get any better. Are we at the end? Well, I can't tell it any better than the real thing, a story recorded by James Madison from the final moments of the Constitutional Convention, September 17th, 1787. As the last few members signed the document, Benjamin Franklin, the oldest delegate at 81 years and in frail health, looked over toward the chair where George Washington daily presided. At the back of the chair was painted the picture of a sun on the horizon. And turning to those sitting next to him, Franklin observed the artists found it difficult in their painting to distinguish between a rising and a setting sun. Reagan continues, "Well, I know if we were there, we could see those delegates sitting around Franklin, leaning in to listen more closely to him." And then Dr. Franklin began to share his deepest hopes and fears about the outcome of their efforts. And this is what he said, quote, "I have often looked at that picture behind the president without being able to tell whether it was a rising or setting sun. But now, at length, I have the happiness to know that it is a rising and not a setting sun," end quote. Reagan finishes the speech by saying, "Well, you can bet it's rising because, my fellow citizens, America isn't finished. Her best days have just begun." So there you have it, the story behind the Hancock chair or the Rising Sun armchair. Until the next episode, happy trails.